genetic. Looking for that extra chromosome.
Hello, and welcome to the If We Knew Then podcast. I'm Stephen Sachs.
And I'm Lori Sachs.
And today we're joined by Julianne Robinson, writer, director, producer.
And one of our favorite humans. You may be most recently familiar with her work in Bridgerton. I met Julianne on a television show called I Feel Bad, and it introduced me to one of my favorite movies, Coming Down the Mountain, which you can watch on Prime Video. It is the story of two brothers, and one of those brothers just happens to have Down syndrome. It was the first movie that I watched that had a character with Down syndrome that was an actual, real depiction, and all the relationships just ring so true to life. And so to be able to speak with Julie today about inclusion and diversity, it was a special treat. We hope you enjoy it.
Welcome, Julianne Robinson.
How are you?
Oh, it's so nice to see your face.
And yours?
We're so excited to talk to you today.
Oh, good.
I know that when we first met, you introduced me to your movie Coming Down the Mountain, and I was able to watch it with Stephen, and then also we watched it with Liam and Sophia.
Oh, it was good.
It was such a great experience to watch with Liam and Sophia, and just because for me, I feel like it benefits Sophia because she's a sibling, and I think that sometimes she probably has thoughts and feelings that are hard to navigate because of the situation. So it was really great to be able to share it as a family.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, and it was also wonderful because I feel like there was an effect on Liam. Because Liam watches lots of movies and he never sees anybody with Down syndrome. And the character is so strong.
Yes, he is. He's very strong. He's very strong. And Tommy was very strong too, the actor. He was very opinionated.
Well, do you want to start with telling us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Julianne Robinson. I am a television director and producer. And I have been for a long time, I guess about 15 years. I've been working in the industry. And I did a movie called Coming Down the Mountain, which was written by a writer called Mark Haddon, who's best known for The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. He wrote that book. It was his only screenplay. Mark decided that he was going to conquer each area that he chose to tackle. So he's a poet, he's a playwright, and in this instance, he decided to write a screenplay. And I was part of the development of the screenplay and the director of the movie.
Julie, had you had any experience with somebody with Down syndrome before this movie?
No, never. None at all. No experience.
Did you have any expectations, or what were your expectations going into it?
It was such a long process developing the script. It took 32 drafts before the BBC decided to make it. It was agonizing. And so by the time the BBC decided to greenlight it, it was so much a part of, and I was involved basically for most of those 32 drafts. So by the time they decided to greenlight it, it was just so part of me that there was no kind of anxiety moving forward.
Working with an actor with Down syndrome, did you have any expectations about what that would be like?
I didn't. I know that was one of your questions, and I'm being truthful. I as a director, I kind of take people as they come, and so I felt. We auditioned many people. We auditioned about 300 actors for that role. And we had group calls for actors. And then we just, before we found Tommy, when we found Tommy, we decided, it was just, he's another actor as far as I was concerned. And all actors, as you know, have their different challenges and their strong suits. And that's how I felt about Tommy.
Man, I love you.
That's beautiful.
I wish the rest of the world was so much. That's just how. That's what we want to hear, because you know a lot of what our experience has been is just different perceptions that people have of our son, and they have different expectations, and that puts different limits on him and barriers that unnecessary barriers that he has to break through. So when someone says they had no expectation, that just makes me
Just
happy.
another actor.
Yeah, that just makes me happy, because that's how. But that's who you are, and that's it's really refreshing. I think just the movie, the way it impacted me, is that it was the first time that I had seen somebody with a character portrayed with Down syndrome that was just like you said, just a person. And this sibling rivalry, you know, Sophia and I did have a conversation about, you know, being brother and sister and what that was. And she said, well, I never felt like pushing Liam down a mountain. But it was just so great to have a real relationship, and even just have that edge of these feelings that can bring angst, and I don't know, it's just so real. And I loved that, because it was a conversation that nobody has.
I think now it was interesting because I only had, I only had my one oldest son who's now 16. I just had him, and we've got two kids. One is 4 years younger, and he's 16, and then 12. And I now look at my kids and I think, gosh, we did get it right. You know, we did get it right with that sibling rivalry, and how, I mean, my kids, they love each other, but then there's moments where they hate each other. And I feel really proud from that point of view. And I also think that something that was really important was that we had Nick Holt playing the other character, because Nick is such a committed actor, and he didn't care about being likable. You know, he didn't care about how he came across. He was just playing those scenes for the absolute intensity of the emotions within the scenes. And he was very close to the age. I mean, he was, gosh, I think he would have been about 17 when he made that. So he understood from the inside what that adolescent first love felt like, and the psychological impact of that. And he just would let Tommy have it. You know, he would just go there. And it's only in retrospect that you realize, you know, we were really lucky to have Nick in that role. I mean, that was, a great piece of casting.
Yeah, well, we're fans of his work, but it is definitely that all of those pieces definitely come through, because you know, when you're talking about Nick Holt's, the truth that he was committed to that role, that's hard. That's really hard as parents. You know, one of our challenges is, if we're in a store or we're someplace with Liam, that to actually participate as parents, we're aware that sometimes people are like, hey, lady,
Yeah.
that boy has Down syndrome.
You give Liam a timeout,
and people are like, whoa, because it doesn't happen, right? And I think that was one, as far as the brother, that was so great for Sophia to see. And I encourage everybody to watch it, just for siblings, you know, just for siblings it's like this entitlement to have all of your emotions, to just have that same liberty that everybody gets. And then for Liam, just that role, to have such a strong role written. And I think one of my favorite lines is when he's mad at his brother for always being the favorite. And he says that mom and dad like me because I'm happy and you're always just depressed. So it has nothing to do with the Down syndrome. It's just you're kind of a bummer. And I just love it, because I think that entire movie could be cast with a typical actor.
With my kids now.
Right. Like, as far as inclusion, that is the true depiction of inclusion, when it's interchangeable. I don't know. I can't say enough about the film. I love it, and it impacted me. And I always, you know, refer to it to people to watch it, just because I think it also speaks so honestly about the parents. And these poor parents who are doing their best, which every parent is always doing their best. But when you're dealing with a child with special needs, I mean, you guys just nailed it. You got it right across the board, because we're going to fail. and just all that, because all those feelings. And Sophia was watching it and she was like, well, that's because the dad was being mean. And I was like, no, the dad wasn't. He was just doing his best, right?
Mm-hmm.
You did mention Bridgerton, and that, oh man, inclusion. It's so beautiful to turn on the TV and just to see unapologetic inclusion. Like that, it's just, that's how it should be, Julie. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yes, yes, it was. It was hard, but I'm really, obviously, really proud of it now. And in terms of the casting, I was very keen, and it was always going to be diverse as far as I was concerned. And I went into my first meeting with Shondaland, and obviously they were already thinking that way. I was thinking slightly differently. I was going to cast the Bridgerton family as diverse, and they had already. I didn't know that Queen Charlotte was historically Black. So, and it's really interesting when you start to look into that and you start looking at the pictures of Queen Charlotte, you can see that she was painted as white, but she was actually diverse. And then once you start building out from that thought, it was really interesting. So they built out from that idea that she had elevated people to high rank. That was the thinking behind that casting across the board. It wasn't as simple colorblind casting. But for me, I'm fine with colorblind casting. So, for a different project, that might be the way to go.
Well, the race had nothing to do with the show. That was what was so fun, and that's where you talking about the way you saw Tommy when you cast him. Not that you don't see things, it's just that they don't matter.
Yes, yes. And I suppose that sounds terribly naive, and it probably is very naive. But that's definitely that's my situation.
We had a 20-minute conversation of what naive was last night.
Somebody called me naive last night.
Because we had been talking about
it was about diversity.
A book called
How to Be
an
Anti-Racist.
Anti-Racist, and it was a book club we were doing, and someone had said maybe I'm naive, and
she said you'd have to be naive to think that, and I was like, well,
then I'm naive,
then
and
I'm
then we were
naive.
kind of debating what naive meant.
What were you talking about?
Well, they were talking, we're on like chapters 7, 8, and 9, and they're talking about, racism and the tattoo that the racism is kind of left behind. And can we look beyond it? Can we actually move forward in an anti-racist
is it possible?
environment?
Was
is
the
it
question.
possible?
Yeah.
And I immediately said yes. It's a choice.
And I said, well, how much time do we have? What are we talking? Like my lifetime, the lifetime of humanity? So it was like that dichotomy.
And then somebody else had an idea that it wasn't. And so I said, I may be naive, but I think it's just a choice. I think, and I actually mentioned you. I mentioned Bridgerton. I mentioned Lin-Manuel. Just that it is just a choice. It's that taking that step and just doing it. And that's what they did with Hamilton. That's what you guys did with Bridgerton, that you make the choice that you're going to make the change. And then you just do it. And that's, man, I of course, when I was watching Bridgerton, I didn't know it was you. And then it got to the end and I went,
of course.
Well, it's funny. I have been in this position before. I cast John Cho in Selfie. So that role was imagined as a white upper-class Englishman, like Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady. And it took a really long time to persuade top to bottom of everybody in that chain that John Cho is a perfect choice. And I still love that show, and John Cho was the perfect choice. But it's sometimes it's hard to, if you have a very clear idea of how something should be, it's hard to kind of get past that.
Well, a beautiful part is the almost universal acceptance of the choices that you made and the choices that were made, because it can be controversial, I guess, but then it's put out there in media, and to see the acceptance is a wonderful thing, and a wonderful thing to say about our time, and that this momentum can continue and keep going.
Yeah. I really, really hope so. But thank you for those words. It really means a lot.
well, it's true. And you also, you're setting the groundwork to, when my daughter turns on TV, that's what she'll see. And I think that's where, when people see it, then, sometimes it takes seeing it before the change can really hold on, and then other people do it. And then it's, of course, why not? Why weren't we doing this before?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Gosh. Oh, I feel quite emotional. Thank you. I'd never even really thought about it this way.
Oh yeah, and it's probably just because that's who you are, and I'd love to know what made you that way, because everybody needs some of that in them. Everybody needs a lot of that in them. But
You've made me think, because I Feel Bad was never originally intended to be an Indian family. Did you know that?
no, I didn't.
No, people assume that because it was written by Asim, but it wasn't. We auditioned many actresses for that role, many actresses. And Sorry You won it. And as a result of her winning the role, we then cast the family as South Asian. And so that's how that show turned out to be what it was. But it was never written as that. It was written as honestly as a white family. And what's interesting is Paul Adelstein, who is a good friend, sends his love, by the way. He was cast before Sorry You, hence the blended family component, which then we went on to write to.
Wow.
So there you are. I'd forgotten that.
Well, it was so perfect. And I think just having that diversity, just telling one of my best friends is Indian, and she doesn't get, like, her kids get to see themselves on TV, right? And just telling different stories and different cultures, and having that, I loved just learning, because then I could go to my friend who's a good friend of mine, and I could share a little bit deeper in who she was.
No, it was so good that Asim was able to really, dig into her heritage, to really write to that. But it's funny. It's only when you start thinking about it. I literally right now, I just remembered, because it became what it was, and it was so much what it was. But I'd forgotten how it started.
Yeah, it was such a beautiful show. It was such really beautiful people.
Well, it takes a wonderful quality in you and in the people that are producing that show for that to even be an option as well, to even have an option to cast someone.
Yes, I'm with you. And I was always, I loved Sorry You. And she's spoken about the audition where she came in, and she walked down, she thought, oh, that's it, I nailed that. But you've got to, hats off to Tracy Picosta, who was head of comedy at NBC Network. Now she's head of comedy at Netflix. And, hats off. She saw who the best person was. No offense to everybody else who auditioned, but she saw Sorry You, she fell in love with her, and there we had our show.
Well, I think if you're aware of it or not, barriers are being broken and by these shows. And we've mentioned him a couple times on the podcast, but I think Norman Lear, and I think of the advocacy that he may not even totally been aware that he was doing. And I think we'll look back at these shows and see that true progress comes in tangent with it.
Just in telling the stories.
Yes, yeah.
In a truthful, honest way, unapologetically.
Completely. That is a great sadness that isn't still on. I think if it had been on even a year later, it would have had a different ride. But it was still very new, and a kind of a new thing for the network to promote, apart from anything else. I think people weren't quite sure how to promote it. It was difficult. It was difficult for everybody to understand on every level what they had, really.
I think that happens when you're the first.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing something new that, maybe in a couple years, and especially I feel like inclusion is now becoming a conversation that people are having, and there's lots of ways that it's being incorporated, but it won't get to be where it's true inclusion until it doesn't have to be like a conversation where we understand where we should put it, because it will be that everybody gets to tell their story and see their story.
Yeah, I think it's it's really important. I think the UK is much better than the US is. I don't know if you've noticed, but in terms of inclusion on television, specifically for disabled people, it's much more open to that, I think. Whether it's part of the BBC mandate, but people just take it for granted far more than they do here. I find it so refreshing when I go back and watch TV. And for me, that's my next area of challenge, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. That's something that I'm really trying to push through and just have representation on screen, because that's, to me, is, that's the big area that is not being challenged right now. The history of Hollywood and the history of entertainment in the US has been, on the whole, white, beautiful people seeing themselves represented on screen, or aspirational in that way, and everybody else's stories have been left out. And when you do get shows, it's kind of inspiration, you get the one character in the sea of kind of neurotypical whatever people, and they are inspirational with their insights, and you don't get a wide representation on screen. And that's what I'm really keen on, and I'm trying to do something about, not only on camera but behind the scenes as well. I think it's about time that area was tackled. So it's interesting that we're talking about coming down the mountain. Sorry, that's my rant.
How that translates into Liam's life is that he walks into a grocery store and everything is inspirational. Everything is a cheer, but there's no expectations on quality of life. We fight for his education. Every year we have a lawyer and have to sit in just for him to be able to be included in a classroom. And that's because there's not a true depiction of that he's a whole person with the same struggles, right? And he has a sister who has the same struggles as any other sibling.
And he has emotions. He can be up and down, and that's okay. He's a 11-year-old boy, and that's
So I don't. It's not a rant at all. It's you nailed it when you say that it does have to. And I think this is where it changes, because media and television and movies, they have so much power in our lives, especially during the pandemic. I mean, that was the first place everybody turned, right? To see stories and hear stories, and the stories like Coming Down the Mountain, they impact, and they're true, and they're real, and they make a change, and they validate our lives, the lives of parents, the lives of an individual with Down syndrome, the lives of a sibling, because it's all just real.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do have a lot of guests from the UK, because I have found that the changes are happening there quicker than the United States. Definitely a much bigger Down syndrome community presence on social media, and that's kind of how we've reached out at this time for guests and for storylines. We had a storyline about Emmerdale and some controversy that was happening there. And if that had happened in the States, I don't think it would have been an uproar about it. I know that show had done some good, and then there's some controversy. And
what was the controversy?
The controversy was that there was a child with Down syndrome on for years, and then the best friend gets pregnant, who's older. She finds out that she has a child with Down syndrome, and she aborts the child. So they were like, Emmerdale, you had a chance to not go there, which is the 90% choice. You had a chance to maybe make an influence. And then there was a backlash of like, well, I mean, really, does this influence anybody? But we know that media influences.
And I think part of the problem was that, their argument was about women's rights, which those are so important. But that wasn't really the story that was being told, because it was not just the right. It was that this decision was being based upon Down syndrome.
Just purely Down syndrome.
And so it wasn't really, because the storyline where this is the mother's decision and it's a hard decision, that's one storyline, because that's real and true. But then when you throw in that, oh, well, it's because of this, then that devalues.
Yeah, there's joy of the pregnancy initially. and then she finds out, and so
That's like, I'm astounded by that. It's like, why would you want to put that on screen? It's just that's a choice, isn't it? Anyway, that I don't know. We were told that there was a possibility that my oldest would have Down syndrome. And we were told, well, the way to find out is to have an amnio. And we just decided we didn't want to take the risk. That seemed like a risky maneuver. So we decided not to. And it was quite ironic because I actually started developing coming down the mountain quite soon after I gave birth. So it's funny because when you look back on things, I don't think I ever really made that connection, but that did happen. But yes, I can see why that storyline would be problematic, to say the least.
When you're pregnant, that's one of the tests that are so heavy-handed. I know here in the United States, like that's the one test that they pretty much mandate it, such a push to have you find out if your child has Down syndrome. And then it's a really horrible conversation afterwards. We've spoken to so many moms, and our experience when Liam was born was you could have done something. And it's just that you would say that to a mom whose child is fighting for his life is like,
I mean, I do find your work very moving. The pieces that I've watched that you have made, very moving indeed, and really insightful.
oh, that means a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thank you.
No, absolutely. I can't forget them. Yeah. The one that you sent me after the wrap party, it's just absolutely beautiful.
The want.
the want, yeah.
That'll be it. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Urge everyone to watch it.
Oh, well, thank you. And well, we feel the same about the things that you create because it's just it's so important, Julie, and it means so much, just talking about when you were pregnant and having that to be approached about having an amnio and that decision. That's one of the things that we really tried to advocate for moms to just not have. I mean, I don't know how it felt. Do you even remember what you felt or how it was delivered, the news, or?
I remember it was an intense time. It wasn't without emotion, but ultimately both of us, we just decided that the risks were just too high to the child. So that's why we decided not to proceed. It just seemed like a very aggressive maneuver. So we just decided we don't either way, it's fine. It's fine. I haven't thought about it literally in 16 years, but I do remember that quite clearly.
Well, sometimes there's such a negative connotation with a diagnosis, and that's part of the reason we developed this podcast, is just to bring a positive story to some things.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Well, and your stories do the same, and we at a much bigger level.
No.
And we appreciate them.
No, I don't think so. I watched some of your podcast. You've got great production values. Yeah, no, it's great. And one of your questions was, do I work with people with a disability, or are there people with a disability in my life? So at this point, what I thought I would talk about is, I don't know if you know this school, Frostig School. Do you know Frostig?
No.
So both of my kids have been to this school. It's called Frostig, and it is a specific school for kids with special needs. So both my kids have got kind of profound symbol recognition issues, i.e. dyslexia. The 12-year-old, has it even worse than my oldest, my 16-year-old. And my second kid's got ADD, and my first kid has ADHD. And so they've both been through this school, and we love this school. It's just such a wonderful community. And it was very interesting. My younger son, who's going there at the moment, he was in a Montessori school before. And I used to go and I'd watch him in the Montessori school, and he had a lot of really good friends, but they were all moving on academically. And in a Montessori school, you tend to, it was a very, very strict Montessori school. So you go, you get your job, they would call it, take your job, do the job, and then put the job away. And I would watch him, and he would be going through the motions. They would be completely hollow. He would just be pretending to do the job, which involved often reading, math, something. And all of his friends would be going on. And so anyway, so he went to the school, Frostig, and you could tell almost immediately he felt like he was included in, he'd found his people. And so I do think it's really important. You were talking about your battles to have your child, the accommodations required for Liam in a mainstream school. I would say as well, it's very hard for parents to accept that their child is maybe not going to get on in a mainstream school, ideally. You know, it's hard to kind of think, well, maybe he's really good in a community of people where he doesn't feel he's the only one, you know. He didn't have to be different. He was in with everybody else, and that made just psychologically to his confidence soared. So what's going to be interesting now for him is he's re-entering mainstream education next year. And it's funny, I was talking to him the other day. He was reading out loud, and he finds it very, very difficult. And I said to him, what are you going to do at school next year if they say to you, read this out loud to the class? You know, I said, what are you going to say? And he said, well, I'm going to get really good at reading so I can read out loud in front of the class. And he's always going to find it very difficult to read, no matter how hard he tries. And so what I'm hoping for him, and I said, well, you can say to the teacher, you know, I'm not comfortable doing that. I don't feel that you know, I just hope that he can learn to advocate for himself in a mainstream setting, because I think that's that's going to be critical, really, for him, is that he learns those skills, because everybody deserves a place in that classroom. And I just feel he's got so much confidence now. I would hate to see it crushed in the mainstream school setting. I'd love to know what you guys think about that.
The verbiage is that he has the support that he needs to access his curriculum in a least restrictive environment. That's it. And there's so many different things. And I think that's the goal, like you said, is everybody deserves a place in that classroom.
Yes.
You know, and it's just like to see everybody dancing at the ball. It's the same thing. So there are lots of different things that he should just have in place that will give him the support, even if it's just the conversation with the teacher, that if he doesn't, that he can volunteer when he feels comfortable to read and not to be called upon, because that's for his, you know, that's for his spirit, right?
The thing is, it's less to do with the accommodations and more to do with the self-advocacy, I think. I really hope that the school that he's in now will do that for him, but also it would be good to know if there's anywhere he can go and get special, maybe training in how to advocate for himself. I just want to see him thrive, you know.
Right. You want to see him thrive and succeed, and there's so many ways for him to do it. And that's really, you know, that those supports are out there for him, and that's the goal. We have a great episode with a behavioralist that even talks about, you know, I have different habits. I have different things that are accommodated in society, right? So we all do. So that's kind of the groundwork and the foundation that we have to give our children. And by doing that, and by creating these inclusive classrooms and creating this beautiful tapestry on the television and film, that's what we do. We create that, and those seeds that are then planted are ones of inclusion and are ones of diversity. And we're so happy that you could join us. And I know you have to cut it short, and we're honored and thrilled and so grateful.
Don't worry. Definitely I'll come back anytime. It's great to talk to you again. I think what you're doing is really, really important, and we should keep talking.
Yes, we'd like that, because we feel what you're doing is equally as important.
Please follow us on Twitter at If We Knew Then Pod, and you can drop us a line on our Facebook page at If We Knew Then Pod, or visit our website, ifweknewthen.com, to send us an email with questions and comments. And you can join our mailing list there and get alerts of future podcast episodes. All these links will be added to this episode's show notes. Thank you again, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of If We Knew Then.